Hi, I'm David Marshall, and I want to welcome you to our presentation at the Australia New Zealand Communication Association Conference, known as ANZCA, on the 25th of November 2022. And as you can see, this is a co-authored paper and presentation with Dr. Nicholas Quill, who couldn't attend our conference, but certainly wishes he could have made it to Australia in person. The title, as you can see, clearly identifies a series of concepts that are integrated through their intersections. The transforming presentation of the contemporary self is complex, but massively naturalized in our day-to-day digital human cultural experiences and connections. From this to, let's move to that next sort of slide, what this long title means. So first of all, this work is directly linked to the study of persona, and specifically how our digital world has altered us collectively and individually in contemporary culture. A digital persona has emerged that is linked to our work identity and what we might call our private identity. My own work in this area developed the concept of privilege, the new configuration of public and private, to capture this shifting sense of self and collective. I'll give a moment for you guys to sort of see me for a moment. Specifically, we've moved into what I've identified in the abstract and many others have advanced on is a new precarity in contemporary culture. As much as we imagine that digital produces a clear algorithmic constitution of culture and identity in its informationally rich conversion of what we present, share, and like, it is also generating different configurations of value, economic, cultural, and political values that are centrally related to past constitutions, but are producing patterns of connection that are well beyond previous forms of mediatization, and their relation to institutions in everyday life. I'll go back and give us that screen again so you can get a sense of it, and move on to the next sort of slide, as we call them. Defining the self is something we engage in, and it is clear our forms of definition, connection, and collective experience shifted somewhat in the era of COVID over the last 3 years. I have attempted to define this change as partly related to a new etiquette that defines our naturalization of online culture as human culture and how we negotiate and navigate the digital world in an era where the proximity of ourself to others is transformed. In my own research, I called this COVIDicate, as you can see on the screen, a new ethos of how the connection to people, this is looking at these images around it, and the disconnection with people developed into what became a new normal, but nonetheless pedagogically developed across human generations and cultures. COVIDicate involves the way in which the public expression of the self has been reconfigured by a pandemic, and also facilitated by the potential of a further reconfiguration of our relationship to others through digital connection. Drawing from the research of Alvanoy on presence, we have a new structure and structuration, to use a Giddens expression, of presence and co-presence, also drawn from Boninger Duarte's work on interfacing ourselves. Our digital connections transform our relation to others. COVID and COVIDicate has shifted our negotiation of our space and relations, and we play with how present we can be and want to be. Let's just take a moment to move on a second and get to this next stage. Just to give you a moment of that, I'll just, for a moment, say it here. So our world transformed digital and presentation of self-world is drawn. Let me give that again. So our world transformed digital and presentation of self-world is drawn at minimum to shifted work environments connected to Zoom, Microsoft Teams, and webinars. Back to the big screen. And we'll go on to the second one there. Not only are there changes in the operation of home and interpersonal connections of friends and family, the somewhat larger transformation of face-to-face, sometimes called F2F, communication into the platforms that are most connected to our work. What I've tried to constitute beyond the persona affected by COVID is the collective formations of work. The platforms that are differently negotiating this territory of self and partially digital persona are to a degree Zoom, a communication technology corporation that has blended into the movement between our work selves across literally millions of businesses, institutions, and corporations. And to add to that, Microsoft Teams, a Viva moment where Microsoft is building a sharing structure that builds the possibilities of collecting information in the application of its platform, again with millions of companies. It is significant to see Zoom as something that does produce a work self, a student self, a lecturer, tutor self in our worlds, our university worlds, and collective relational self in other meetings. Microsoft, in its massive connection to organizations, has linked its development of parallel modeling and mapping to Viva and Teams as dealing with and facilitating a new something they use, quote, hybrid environment, unquote. As teachers, lecturers, and tutors in this new and reconstructed environment of presenting the self, we can see the manipulation of screens, backgrounds, face locations, as you can see in the images beside, neutralizing with darkness, as we can often have seen in our own production of these sorts of things. Sound privileging, text privileging via chat is changing our structure of connection, our structure of learning, and delivering learning that is paralleled across our various institutions and work environments. Hybridity describes the new persona developing and the new collective configuration of human communication related to work, but also leisure. Let's just jump on a second here. As you can see, the third step in this research that emerges from this new hybrid work and home construction of the self is an aspirational digital persona that is very much linked to branding. We have normalized the mediatized editing of the self. This digital persona is linked to a form of commodification that makes it a kind of emerging branding. And as we explore further, we can identify that we are moving into a reformation of the self through, again, a form of integrating value and responding by the agency of self-production through our digitally reformed cultures. I've listed here a relatively quick structuring of this from Hootsuite's categorization of influence, and now the commonplace deployment of the term of agentic identity, what we term influencer. Connected to this, it is also to fully understand the entrepreneurial self that negotiates itself through social media platforms, but also moments of collective work structures. Entre, meaning in English between, and preneur, meaning taker, and how this defines the commodified agency that is a fictive strategy of persona in our contemporary digital reconstruction of human life. Bouncing to the big screens, again, to comprehend this negotiation of the self, I use the term curation, as you can see on this screen. Let's bump into that. Curating is very much our understanding of the digital world. It is an integration of how information and affective sentiment works its way through this different hybrid, again to use the Microsoft Viva term, environment that is normalized in our work communication as much as other directions. Cultural studies, perhaps as a discipline, best develop the idea of the subcultural transformation of our working through the structure of feeling, to use a Raymond Williams term, to capture the forms of activity that define our curation and also connect to others, and communicatively, the institutions that still inhabit our everyday activities. As listed here, it is a partial knowledge to guide ourselves, this curating of the digital self. There is manner and connection and positioning on platforms like Zoom, but of course the sites and platforms that shape us further, possibly like LinkedIn and its particular connection to work in Microsoft. What emerges in this relative agency is a world of influencers, KOLs perhaps, and followers, or from Facebook, friends, what Carpi identified well as an industrial formation of us in relative levels of engagement, which I will explain briefly in the next section. So let's pop along here. But curation is not everything. And for a moment, I'll just give you a moment of seeing me again. Curation is not everything. We are generating the digital reconstruction of information about ourselves in and through the various platforms and corporations that shape our digital forms of work and communication. The term, and I'm going to have to bounce back into the image again, I use to capture this difference in communication. From an industrial perspective, and recalibration is, as you can see me pointing there, correlation. Let's go into that. Industrial correlation is the activity of the industries that are connected directly to our experiential, digital, and in this case, generally work-related hybrid environment, to use Microsoft Teams and Viva again. Microsoft Viva and Zoom work differently than Facebook, Instagram, WeChat, Twitters, TikToks of the world. But fundamentally, they have paralleled these industrial configurations of what we do in everyday digital life. With Zoom and Microsoft, there is an anonymization that takes our information and activity in institutions into a formation of wider and wider spheres through mapping of data that works widely through our world through what Sumter developed well as PCA, principal component analysis of our activities, our affective expressions of like and connection, and how these are calculated into recognizable patterns for shaping the entire industry. The closest way of understanding this kind of correlation is that it feeds back into the institutions that have taken on these applications. But, and I put that in capital letters, but, perhaps even larger, it connects that information across, as the original work of Facebook has done for a generation, as YouTube has done for perhaps longer, as Google has done by our online searching, and made it into pattern configurations for further connections, what we would call broadly advertising, but often connections to other commodities and services. Our industrially correlated personas, our peculiar reconstruction of our curated personas, what we curate. And with Microsoft Viva in particular, it is a direct way to affectively, via digital and anonymized information from millions correlating online and produces a curation of our work environments and communication networks, which is valuable across promotional structures in our worlds. We have now advanced on the personal elements and curation of our presentation of the contemporary self and the industrial correlation of our digital personas, work, leisure, pleasure selves. this combination of who we are as we go forward. Still fictive, but nonetheless there. Let's move on to this next one here. My conclusion is mapping the future directions of this research. I'm saying, in a way, this presentation goes part way. So what this work on the transformation of the self through its digital reconfiguration points us is to further expand the insights. There is no question. What we've identified is a transformation of organizational communication. The hybrid environment, to use the Microsoft term once again, is a blending for us of the former notion of presence and co-presence with the digital social self partially reconfigured by the intercommunication industry. We need to work through the layers and elements of self and identity that are at play in our transformed world. There are always strategic fictive personas, some industrially constructed, others curated and constructed by ourselves. And it is important to work more deeply in understanding these industrialized and entrepreneurialized constitutions of identity in contemporary digital communication. I want to point to, in these last slides, let's jump a little bit. Although this referencing, this is what I'm pointing to, is far from complete, many of the citations here, my article from Thesis 11, if you're looking closely, is one major one, collectively lists some of the key sources that inform what's going on here. Similarly, Nicholas Quill, and a few of my other recent works intersect with this study of the constructed self emerging from our hybrid forms of communication. Zoom and Microsoft Teams, that's what we use. Branding and persona are dealt with in the visually iconic books off to the left, as you can see. And let's move on a little bit. And what I want to do is thank you for listening today. But significantly, we are looking for more collaborators with this research into Zoom. And as you can see, and probably Microsoft Viva as well, Microsoft Teams, we have the research launched with 9 researchers involved with what is entitled Personalized and Collectively Mediatized Institutional Communication, a study of Zoom. Contact me if what I've advanced today and the short, let's jump a bit ahead here. Contact me if what I've advanced today in the short, dense description of our project listed here and summarized here interests you. I'll give you a few seconds to sort of look that over and see that what is presented here and elsewhere is trying to say that there are transformations of ourselves, our curated self, our self persona that's digitally constructed, and our industrially correlated self, the Zooms and Teams, reconfigurations that are there, and the kinds of informations that are drawn from it. So if you're interested, get a hold of us quickly, and I'll go back to the giant big slide. Hopefully, there we go. And I want to thank you all just for a moment. Again, you'll see all the information there. There's a link to the Prezi down in the left corner if you want to flash on this screen. I want to thank you all for listening to me today, and I want to thank you for actually taking a look at this big production. And so long for now. Hopefully, I'll hear from you soon. Bye-bye.